Okay, while we're waiting for a few more folks to come in, I have no idea what to anticipate participation-wise. I know that this is an exciting topic. I also know that it's a little overwhelming of a topic because TikTok is really fun, but when you think about doing it from what we'll talk about today, I think it's a different challenge when you think um, affordable housing on TikTok and not dancing or making silly faces or following trends, but rather setting trends. So good afternoon. My name is Amanda Nelson. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications at San Diego Pride. I just started here a couple weeks ago. So when I submitted this proposal, accepted this proposal, I had done it on behalf of San Diego Housing Federation, where I was the Director of Communications. So I am delighted that the Housing Federation was still able to let me kind of facilitate today's conversation. And to really kind of talk about the TikTok campaign that we launched last summer and what we learned from it. And then also to hear a little bit from Jake, who can kind of talk from the content creation side and kind of how he is disrupting a little bit of the housing, transit, urban planning as far as TikTok. And special shout out to Natasha, who wasn't able to join us today. She is currently on a flight to a fabulous trip somewhere in Europe. I can't recall where she said she was going, but she is also someone who is kind of disrupting a little bit of the conversation on TikTok and Twitter. So we've got some great minds in the room. So I'm going to pass it over to Mia for an introduction, and then we'll go to Jake.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everybody. I dropped it in the chat, but my name is Mia. I'm the digital director at Mixty Communications. So we're a boutique communications agency based all over the country. And we got to collaborate with the San Diego Housing Federation on this exciting campaign that we're about to walk you all through. I think the thing worth noting is just that our company is really happy and proud to work with justice-oriented clients and values-aligned clients, which really brought us to the San Diego Housing Federation, and we've had quite a long relationship with them. So we're really excited to be here today. And Jake, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake. I currently work for the Long Beach Post here in Long Beach, California. I make social media content for them, basically talking about the news that's going on in Long Beach and Southern California. And that directly stemmed, I guess, from my TikTok account that I sort of built over the last year during the pandemic, where I was sitting around thinking, okay, I have all this time and a bunch of knowledge about stuff that I learned at school. How could I make something out of that? And I just started making videos, and apparently people are interested, so I kept doing it. That's all I am.
I love that. That's very much, I think, our generation, right? We can use the internet to find new opportunities, to enhance our careers, to elevate our speaking opportunities. And, you know, I had seen Jake's content. And so when I was putting together this panel, kind of slid in his DMs and was like, hey, do you want to participate? The content you're creating is really cool. So yay, so I'm excited for this afternoon. The way that today's conversation is going to work is Mia and I will kind of talk, well, mostly Mia, will talk briefly about the campaign we did with the San Diego Housing Federation, how we started it, what we did, all that kind of jazz. And then we'll kind of move into a little bit of a Q&A with Jake and Mia about content creation. I have a few TikToks of Jake's that I want to share. So that we can kind of get a nice dialogue going. And then we would love to answer any questions that you might have. Because this is an hour and a half, and I don't know if the three of us have an hour and a half to discuss, we really want to be, you know, use our minds. If you have questions on TikTok or the content or things like that, we can kind of do a little brainstorming brain tree for folks in the room who are looking to create content but might not have the direction or haven't had the capacity to sit down with like a Mixty Communications and map out everything. So you've got three great heads in the room. So think about that when we get to the Q&A. But Mia, let's kick it over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. I am so honored to be kicking us off. And I just have to laugh at the way you introduced yourself, Amanda, as TikTok being one of your favorite things, because I partially think that's how all of this started, because we both just shared a deep love for TikTok, and probably you too, Jake. And then that sort of got our wheels turning about what we could do. And I think that is really where this originated from. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to walk us through this campaign that we worked on in collaboration with the Housing Federation. There is a lot of information that I'm going to try to distill and keep interesting for you all this afternoon, but we are going to go through it quickly. So if there are questions, perhaps it'd be good to have a Q&A at the end where we can talk through all of it. So, okay, with that, let me go ahead and just share my screen and we can jump in. All right, let's see. There we go. Everyone can see? Yeah? Okay, perfect. So let's just talk about the goal for this campaign. When we got brought on to work with the San Diego Housing Federation, we wanted just a short-term campaign to try something totally different to spread the knowledge about affordable housing. And we wanted to just do it in a totally new way, right, Amanda, that just sort of broke out of the box of sort of things that we had been trying, messaging we had been using to reach a brand new audience. And the idea behind this was we would test a whole bunch of things. We had a very experimental mindset just to learn and hopefully build a base of people who had new understanding of what affordable housing is, why it matters, maybe combat some longstanding misconceptions, and build a foundational level of understanding so that people could then take action from that down the line, whether that's give donations at some point or be a more educated voter or perhaps join as a volunteer. We were sort of just planting the seeds with this campaign. So it ran from March through July. In March, we just did a whole bunch of listening and research, which I'll sort of touch on. In April, we developed our campaign strategy. In May, we created a bunch of videos and assets, and then the campaign ran only for June and July. So it was really a short project, but here's what we learned. Okay. So we knew before we could jump in, we had to do some research to understand messaging, visuals, all of that stuff. Our target audience was older Gen Z and younger millennials. So I think that was like ages 20, late teens, early 20s, late 20s. But we wanted to know, how do they feel about affordable housing today, and what preconceived notions might they already be showing up with? So we collaborated with the Housing Federation to come up with a handful of short, hopefully easy to answer questions, identify some folks that we could distribute the simple surveys to, and see what they shared with us. So in a nutshell, this is what we learned. This group, the group that filled out our survey, had compassion toward the homeless population in San Diego County. And they wanted to stay informed, but they didn't want to go out of their way to get involved. It was kind of a nice to have. The education was nice to have, information was nice to have, but they weren't out searching for it. Ultimately, this group believed policymakers were responsible for creating long-term change. And there's this misconception that probably isn't news to any of us, that affordable housing means your neighborhood isn't good anymore, right? And that the housing costs in San Diego are extreme. Okay, so that took us really nicely into forming the strategy, knowing that this is sort of the way people were showing up. How could we then meet them? So we decided that we were going to focus on TikTok and Instagram, and we were going to create a series of fun and informative videos, just short video clips, 10 to 15 seconds. And then we would share this content organically, so not paid, on our social media channels, but we would also put a little bit of a budget behind us to reach people that we hadn't talked to before. And we came up with kind of a fun theme. We decided to call it Basically Housing. And we went through this really fun brainstorming process at the San Diego Housing Federation. And I think at one point, Amanda, we just were like, all roads lead back to more housing. everything, it's just people need their basic needs met. They basically just need housing. And so that kind of is how it landed on basically housing. And this is a good point to mention that we were also really trying to keep in mind our audience and our platform and break out of jargon, break out of common messaging that we as advocates might lean into as being the right words to use, right? Because we knew if we did that, we would immediately lose people. So we really were pushing our creative comfort zone, I think. And basically housing was where we landed. So the video content was just short and informative. We had to talk a lot about, we're not going to be able to cover everything in these 10 to 15 second videos. They have to be fun or else no one's going to watch them. So we had to just get okay with that as a team, I think. And I think that was a challenge for us, right, Amanda? Like learning how to just say, okay, we're going to talk about this one sentence and that's all. And there's so many caveats in our work, right? That was really hard for us.
I just wanted to piggyback on that or dive into it a little bit more, Mia, that in housing, there's so much context and so much information, and it's really difficult to get it down into 10 seconds. And so with kind of knowing that it was basically housing, that helped guide us and strip us down into what we wanted to focus on first. And it was really primarily just showing what is housing. And it took us a while to get there because it was like, well, it's deed restricted, it's NOAA's, it's, you know, and so it was, okay, yes, that is true, but we need to start, you know, bottom of the barrel, scrape it to very bare minimum so that we can start building people to become these advocates. So that was probably, I think, the most challenging thing. And now in retrospect was getting us to that point of knowing that first 10 or 15 seconds, those first couple of videos were going to be very basic and no jargon, really. So it was a challenge.
It really was a challenge, and also a really good team building opportunity for us to say, okay, what are we really, really trying to do here? These are not advocates. These are people who probably don't ever search out anything about affordable housing of their own initiative. So how do we meet them where they are and make it fun enough that they're just easily able to learn? And I think, you know, without going totally off the rails, I think that's something that as nonprofit communicators, we think about all the time, right? How do we engage people in a really relevant issue in a way that makes it matter for them, that they understand? So we could talk more about that, probably the whole session, but let's move on. It sort of to this last bullet point, we wanted to focus on being educational and humorous. So providing something of value, but also being lighthearted with it versus the emotional appeal of more of like the heart-wrenching story or something like that. So we decided to keep it, I think, a little bit on the lighter side this round. On a more granular sense, we created a basically housing Instagram and TikTok account. With Amanda's help, we actually recruited some advocates and folks who are experts on affordable housing in San Diego County to help us record some video content. And then we edited the interviews into short clips that we could use on Instagram and TikTok. And we had a very detailed project timeline. These were probably the keys to our success, maybe that last one especially. And then we decided we were going to focus on a few metrics to help us determine what does success look like? How do we know which video performed best? Ultimately, engagement was our number one. So we didn't need people, this wasn't a call to action. We didn't need people to actually do anything or read more or donate or volunteer. We really just wanted people to engage. We saw that if people were engaged with our content, that was probably a good direction to keep heading. And secondarily, we looked at new followers. All right. So are you ready to see some fun videos? Jake, I'm curious what you would think about these. Here were the social media profiles. This is an example of a one sheet that we actually sent to some of our fellow advocates to get them on board with helping us record videos. You don't have to read all of this, but if you're asking yourself the question of how do I reach out to people I know to get their help recording videos, here's one example of the way that we broke it down. And we decided a one-pager would empower Amanda with all of the information she needed to then go to her colleagues and her friends and say, hey, I need your help. Here's all of the info right here. It took us a minute to get here because anything simple takes a while. But you can see that we have a lot about the summary of the campaign, how they can help us, questions we'd like to ask. And this is really interesting because you'll notice how vague these questions are. What is affordable housing, right? We're talking to experts and we're asking them this vague high-level question. What are the programs available? How does affordable housing impact our communities? And where can you go if you want to take action? But I think we even largely stuck to the very first question. We ended up with 5 videos. The first 3 are all featuring people that were willing to create TikToks for us. And the last 2 were videos of actual affordable housing developments to combat this idea that affordable housing means you live in a certain type of neighborhood, right? So I want to just play 2 for you. They're very short. First, we'll play Ari's video right here, and then secondly, we'll play the property number 1 video. Okay, so this is Ari's video. Oh, let's start it over. Here we go. Just a bit of sugar to that horrid bitter. Okay, and here's the property video. So just super, super short little videos. Okay, and now let's get into how they did. On TikTok, that property video that you just saw performed the best. And we actually got the second property video a little bit late, and I believe it didn't make it onto TikTok, right, Amanda?
It did end up getting on TikTok. I don't think it got all of our ad dollars, so I don't think that's why it wasn't included in this final chart.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, it didn't have a fair shot. But that first property video did a really great job. And you can see just based on reach, views, and watch time, it surpassed all of the other videos. Ari's video, the dancing video that you just saw, got the most clicks on it, which was really great, but ultimately didn't surpass the property video. On Instagram, the property video also did extremely well. Just overall, looking at all of the metrics, it got by far the most comments and shares and engagements. And that makes sense if you think about the social media platforms. They continue to show content that is getting engagement. So the more comments and shares and likes you're getting, the more likely your video is to be seen by more people. So it kind of has this snowball effect. There were some bonus things that came to light as well. We ended up developing 9 social posts for our first ever TikTok foray. I think 9 posts is pretty good. We acquired some new followers. We ended up getting 26,000 people to engage or engagements with our content, and more than 300 comments, which were really, really interesting to go through. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Oops. But here are the overall takeaways, right? Just if we're thinking about this at a high level, what can we walk away with? The upbeat videos with the music got the most engagement. So the property video and Ari's video both had fun music. You probably saw Amanda and I kind of like dancing along as they were playing. That was a key to success. And also people recognized the places in the property video, and that sort of sparked some conversations like, oh, I've seen that building, or, oh yeah, that's in my neighborhood. The videos that were the advocates more talking to the camera, they just didn't do as well, and that's okay. It sort of just tells us that's not really the right approach. on TikTok, and that's what we sought out to learn. And just in terms of engagement, TikTok blew Instagram out of the water for this campaign. So we did go through all 303 comments and we pulled them out into 5 common sentiments, which I just want to quickly touch on with all of us here. There is the preconceived notion that housing is an issue, right? And that was seen in comments like there's so many requirements and most people who actually need affordable housing can't meet them. This is a joke, right? There's this conception that it's just impossible. Or that the city is not doing anything. And I think this is probably a point of frustration Amanda experienced a lot, and goes back to our survey in the beginning that policymakers are solely responsible. And then the high cost of living was something we saw so many times about people just like saying they couldn't possibly afford to live here, or it's inaccessible. There was a sentiment around the gentrification of communities, which makes complete sense with what San Diego's going through. I think that was relatable and we understood. Again, that housing was in undesirable neighborhoods and that affordable housing means sacrificing quality of living, that it's just the projects, right? There was a lot of unfiltered responses in these comments, which is great because, sometimes when you're given a survey, people might sort of censor their answer or say what they think they should say, but in the comments on social media, you can learn a lot. All right, so here's at the end of it all, when July rolled around, we turned off the ad campaign and we reflected on it all. Here were some of the big wins that we realized happened. Getting approved for issue-based advertising as an organization is a really hard thing to do, especially for the first time. So just the fact that we got approved to run issue-based ads was a win. You only have to do it once. So if the Housing Federation wants to run housing ads again on TikTok, it will be easy for them. Everything will be set up and ready to go. We got to leverage both Instagram and TikTok. That was a huge win. We were on a new platform for the first time. We ran different videos simultaneously and we were okay with experimenting with different content. With Amanda's help, we quickly prepared another property video to throw into the mix to make sure we had as many as we could. And I'll touch on the time that we lost in just a moment, but we boosted some of the winning ads even more at the very end to spend the full budget that we had allocated. Let's talk about the challenges for a moment. As I mentioned, getting approved to run issue-based ads is really tough. It took about, I think in the end, almost 2 months, which in our project timeline in the very beginning, we approached it all as experimental, but we definitely didn't plan for 2 months just to get ready to run ads, not even running the ads, just getting approved to run the ads. And that's because if you're talking about anything that social platforms deem as an issue-based theme, and that probably applies to everyone on this call, you have a lot more hoops to jump through versus if you were just selling something, or if you doing self-promotion or something related to a product, you wouldn't have to go through that. And then some videos weren't approved. Instagram won't run ads that have the TikTok logo on them. So we had to then go back and take the TikTok logo off all the videos. It just caused a bit more of a delay. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but this was still, this was what, summer, spring 2021. So this is when vaccines were just starting to be rolled out. No one was in the office. It was really difficult to find time to meet with people comfortably, to get things scheduled. COVID was really hitting the community really hard, and meeting people in person was a bigger ask. Amanda, is there anything you wanted to add about any of these?
Oh yeah, so much to add. So the scheduling, the content stuff was, I think, the biggest hiccup that we did not anticipate. Finding folks to be in it, finding folks who understood a little bit of the nuances of TikTok, of where, like wanting to dance or wanting to kind of do some of the the different things. And then also, I think because we were doing this from such a let's just see what happens, I think that was a little bit of a challenge in the sense of we had direction, but it was still like, we don't know what we don't know, which can be a challenge. And I'm very grateful for the leadership of the Housing Federation that allowed Mia and I essentially to just make it up as we went, to have that trust that we were experimenting something new and to not anticipate for the platform to become, you know, to go viral or to for it to be something that was necessarily continued to be upkept, but something that we could look at and learn from. And those 300 plus comments were, I mean, they chef's kiss, because I then got ideas of other campaigns that were helpful because they were so candid in their responses in ways that, like Mia, you were saying, that they won't do in a survey, right? People are much more open about what they think around housing in comment sections. And it can be a little like, you want to pull your hair out because they're misconstruing something, or they're saying things like, oh, affordable housing doesn't exist, like on the property videos. And it's like, you just saw 5 properties where those are specifically designated affordable housing, and people were still saying, oh, that doesn't exist, I bet the rent there is $1,200. And that might be, but because of programs, people aren't paying that much money. But so it really highlighted how much more work I think needs to be done and how much work can be done around TikTok and affordable housing. You know, like there was so much that we learned, and so much that I'm now bringing into San Diego Pride, where there's a lot more intersectionality when it comes to our advocacy, and that includes housing. You know, there is a huge disproportionate of LGBTQ folks who are housing insecure and face repeated homelessness, and who face housing discrimination even when going for affordable housing. And so TikTok, those comments for me were very enlightening. So even if you do an experiment like this, I know that as marketers, those comments are a little, we weigh on them. They stick with us a little bit, but I really encourage folks to use them as an opportunity to revisit campaigns and to think outside of the box, because it was a really good learning opportunity of how much more needs to go. And then I also just wanted to comment on getting TikTok approved as a nonprofit, and there was a lot of different things that we weren't aware of. Some other things like music, like there were some trending songs we couldn't use because we were a TikTok business account. And so we could have, you know, remixed them audio wise and done some funky things around that. But as small nonprofits, we don't necessarily have the bandwidth always to be creating, you know, audio on top of the content that we're creating. So it had its challenges, but I think at the end of the day, it was really successful. It taught us that properties kind of are where I think, you know, those who are listening would be a great thing for you to run with, of showing what's in your communities. It was amazing to see the comments of people being like, oh, I live there and it got me on my feet, or now I have a friend who lives there and they're able to, you know, thrive in ways that they weren't before. And it was really nice, I think, for others to see that affordable housing isn't, you know, the Cabrini Greens of the world, and it's not these terrible developments from the 90s or the 70s, but it's stuff that's been built within the last 20 years. It's stuff that's being built right now. It's all the stuff that you guys have been learning about today and yesterday. So it's really exciting. But Mia, did you have anything else to add? Do we want to?
You know, I have just 1 or 2 more slides, but I just really appreciate and it was perfect timing, Amanda, because you brought up the willingness of the leadership at the organization to just let us learn. And I think that was so invaluable, just having that trust to know, okay, I just need to know enough about what you're doing to ensure it's mission aligned, so that I can make sure we have the resources for it. But go out and test and experiment and learn. And then let's take what we've found and use that to, apply for grants in the future so we can do this on a bigger scale. And that was a big intention that I forgot to mention was let's learn. And it can feel so, we're all such busy people, and it can almost be hard to justify doing things just to experiment sometimes. Mm-hmm. But there really is no other way. I feel like we can think we maybe know the answers, but until we actually try on a small scale, how do we really know?
Right, and that's what that learning is what brought us all here today is,
Exactly.
We were able to look at that, and I was, able to pitch Housing California for this conversation because I want other Housing California folks to be learning and to be experimenting and to use what we learned and what we'll continue to discussing to, my hope is to just create as many housing advocates of my generation and younger as possible. I want an entire Dumbledore's army of just, housing advocates and intersectionality and folks who are able to, go out and vote and be engaged in their community and, just make this world a more equitable place for us all. So having the leadership that allowed us to just learn, I think was so vital that we were able to really learn. There was no other thing, was just to learn what people were interested in, especially this younger demographic. We wanted to know what they were thinking. And some of what they repeated in the comments was, talking points we hear in the news or stuff we hear from NIMBYs. And that is learned stuff. So if they can learn that, they can learn the other side too.
Yep. This was the start of creating Dumbledore's army. And an advocate can simply be someone that watches a video and thinks about something differently, right? Or remembers something differently. Or maybe they talk to their mom at the dinner table about the thing they saw on TikTok that day, which, I talk to my friends about what I see on TikTok. So that's very likely, right? And that's how it starts. So getting comfortable with planting the small seeds, I think, was a really big deal. And I'm glad you brought that up, Amanda. Thank you. So if we were to do this again, if we could give you all advice on what to do, this is really the nuts and bolts of where we would probably start. We recommend running ads for longer. You can just get more information when you run ads for longer. We ran out of time because some of those other things that we mentioned just took really long. So we'd say at least 3 months. You can't get a whole bunch of data in a week or two. So at least 3 months. Concentrate on TikTok. The engagement just soared there. Put your efforts there, your budgets there, if you're trying to reach the younger audience. There probably could have been a lot of opportunity in acknowledging or validating the community's frustrations. We didn't do that. We didn't really engage much with the comments. We didn't post any videos that said, you may feel this, or you may think this, or many people experience this, to validate what they were going through. But that could be a great jumping off point to then move them to action, to feel like they're being seen, and here's some other resources or ideas or information or way of looking at something. Choose a creative concept, something that ties all your videos together, and create a series of upbeat videos with bite-sized information. Don't try and do it all in one video. And then we didn't do this, but it would have been really neat to create a package of videos that we could then share with partners or allies in the space, because creating good videos just takes resources. And if someone has that and we're all moving toward the same vision and mission, why not share them and just spread them as much as we can? So that's what we would recommend if we were to do this again. And if we do get to do this again, this is what we'll do. And I think that's it summarizing our campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Amanda, what do you think? Is this a good time for Q&A, or should we maybe move over to Jake?
Yeah, no, we can do a little Q&A. Are there any questions initially, kind of right off the bat, about this campaign, or what we did, what we didn't do, what we learned? I will also say that while you're kind of thinking of your questions, TikTok, I think, is very much the future of our socials. TikTok is what Twitter was, 15 years ago. And now we're all very comfortable with Twitter, and I hear they're finally working on an edit button. But but I think TikTok brings new levels to marketing that haven't necessarily been explored before. TikTok very much has a lot of inside jokes that move through things very quickly. What was trending and what was popular, a week ago might not be the same. But then there's also, creators like Jake, where they're creating the same kind of stuff and people are seeking that out. And they're seeking out ways to learn information that isn't so dense or so oversaturated by certain faces and voices. It's very much a younger demographic. It's very diverse. There's, if you're not on TikTok, I highly recommend that you download the app and just kind of start scrolling. And if you need any support or help, I'm more than happy to send you a bunch to get started. But, there's like segments of TikTok of like witch TikTok, and there's LGBTQ TikTok, and there's, transit TikTok, and there's all of these different kind of elements, but we all need homes, and housing is so important to all of us, whether we acknowledge it or we're not aware of it. And I think we all know this. And TikTok, I think, is giving us this door to create new conversations that haven't been had before, and a door for advocacy and a door for change. In ways that, maybe social media hasn't brought us in the past. And something I think it can be a little healing, if you will. But if we have any questions, pop them in the chat. I don't think so. I'm kind of stalling for time here. Oh, here we go. Here's a question. Yeah, great question, Jessica. So asking about research. So one of the things we did before this campaign, and Mia can touch on this a little bit more, is we identified, pockets around San Diego of who we wanted to speak with within that age range. So we were really looking about 18 to 34. And so we looked at, if you're familiar with San Diego, La Jolla, for example, is a wealthier neighborhood. There's a lot of pushback when it comes to affordable housing, when it comes to any non-single family home housing. And so we wanted to make sure that when we did this outreach, this research, that we were talking to folks who were both pro-housing and aware, but also who weren't aware, but still fit within this demographic. But Mia, you probably have a little bit more to share on that.
I think I'll just piggyback on that with two things. One is that, yes, we intentionally targeted a bunch of different neighborhoods in San Diego to ensure that we weren't just getting responses from a wealthier community or just a historically underserved community. We wanted to really try and get a bigger picture because we were going to be targeting San Diego County in our ads. So we wanted to distribute the surveys as much as we could throughout San Diego County. And I think the other thing that we haven't necessarily mentioned, Amanda, is that was Laura's role. And I'm forgetting her title right now. Can you remind me?
Yeah, she was Chief of Policy and Programs.
Okay, thank you. So Laura, the Chief of Policy and Programs, was part of all of our strategizing and was part of all of the conversations. And she was just such a wealth of knowledge about housing misconceptions in San Diego County and audience behavior. And I think she even talked about her own family's misunderstanding of affordable housing and what she experienced as a person outside of work. So I think she was also valuable in helping us understand our audience. And we even went to, I believe the mayor of San Diego was speaking about affordable housing right around the same time when we were developing this campaign. So we got to virtually listen to him speak, and he took questions from us. And we even asked the question, what do you as the mayor feel like is the biggest misconception? So I think we pulled from a bunch of different places to try to best understand our audience on a short time frame. And then we got all the comments once the campaign was done, and that really painted a clearer picture for us.
Yeah, and I think it was important for us to use the responses in that research phase to guide us a little bit on the content creation and the questions, what is affordable housing and what does it mean to communities, by better understanding where people's knowledge was starting, and knowing that this campaign was really about just experimenting and really kind of seeing what we would get. I thought for sure that the people TikToks would perform way better. I did not anticipate the properties to perform as well as they did. And so that was something that I was like, oh, and for me, it's a moment to check my biases and check my assumptions, because they're not always right. And I, really wanted to learn. And so that was the case.
Amanda, can I add one thing onto that
Yeah.
just very briefly? And this is something I encounter a lot when working with organizations where we are not the target audience. Is we really have to, what you said, check your bias, but also just have self-awareness that the people on this call are not the people that we were trying to reach in this campaign. So we often would say, that's why the surveys mattered, or that's why we had an intern who helped us, who was a bit on the younger side. We asked her often, like, what do you think about this? Would you watch this video? Because we're not the ones. We have a lot of insider information. We've been talking about this a lot. And also we're just a bit on the, just on the older side a little bit. So that's such an important reminder to constantly remember, are you the target audience? And if you are not, how can you run something by someone who is?
Mm-hmm.
So I just really want to hone in on that, because that's so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that was key. So another one of the questions here was costs associated with ads. I think our budget was really low for this, Mia.
$2,000 for the whole,
total.
for the ads, total. Yeah.
Which we kind of went back and forth on, do we spread the money equally? And we ended up kind of putting more money towards one that was performing higher. And Mia, you can speak to this a little bit more. I don't think money is necessary if you want to just start creating content, and we can talk about this a little bit more with Jake, and so that you guys can get a little bit of both sides, right? The paid kind of perspective and a little bit of the content creation. But we did it with as little as $2,000, so it can be as much or as little as what your budget allows. I don't want to say that you can't do it without money, because Jake is an example of that. We can talk about that as well a little bit more. The next question we got here is, I think, stuck. If we pointed our audience to do anything. So I think our big thing was just to follow us. We had gone kind of back and forth on if we wanted people to sign up or to get on our newsletter or to join this or that or the other. And ultimately we decided that we wanted people to follow, and we wanted people to just start listening, so that we could then figure out what that audience is going to look like and engage with, so that we could then start saying, hey, join us here, or contact your elected officials there. But the key for us was really to just listen and learn from this demographic, that 18 to 34-year-olds, because I mean, we had some in the office, but as we all kind of know, we work in this space. And so, like Mia was just saying, it's a little difficult to know what others don't know, because we are so inundated with our acronyms. I'm sure after attending this conference that you have even more acronyms, even more things that are kind of, coursing through your brainwaves. And so it was important for us to make it as simple as possible, and that was a follow.
Yeah, exactly. And, this is another thing that we have to think about often as communications people and marketers, is like, very simply put, you can't ask someone to marry you on the first date. You can't. Like, if we're like, hey, liked our video, sign up for our newsletter, like write a letter to your elected officials, go to our website, it would just be way too much. And if you think about yourself as just a person who consumes social media or news or anything from causes you care about, when you're just getting to understand a cause or an issue or an organization, you take your time, you try to figure out if you like them, if you align with them, if you trust them, before you then dedicate your time, money, resources in some other way, or give out your personal information, which is more coveted now because we're all dealing with spam and and just information overload. So that was sort of our thinking behind, let's not ask them to do anything, let's just listen and build relationships. And I did see a question about the process to apply to TikTok to post social issues, Laura. Let me find you the link for that, and I'll paste it in the chat, because there are lots of step-by-step guides out there. But what I really want you to take away from this is that just plan for multiple months.
Yeah.
There's just many hoops to jump through, but I'll find you the step guide.
Right. And then also, I mean, well, this is kind of a little bit nice segue to start talking with Jake, but if you want to do it as a business, or if you want to do it as yourself, there's different approaches. If you want a business account, there is a little bit more hoops to go through. But if you want to create an account just yourself and you want to talk about it as you, as Laura, there's no hoops. You know, you can just get on and get going. So there's a question on here about security concerns. I am not the person to ask about this, because I'm all for having my data everywhere, because I get better targeted ads. They know what I want. So
You're hilarious.
I did see that AOC posted about, you need to have like 2-step authorization and those kinds of things. I haven't seen much about the security concerns around TikTok in a while. I imagine most of them are still there, but I have my Alexa Dot, and I'm more than happy for her to overhear conversations so that she tells me that I should buy something because she heard that I wasn't sleeping well. I recognize that everybody is that way, so maybe me or Jake might have some more insight on that, but
I just think that is the reality of social media a little bit, right? I'm not concerned about it. And I also accept the fact that if I'm using social media, that to some extent, my data is out there in the world. For me, the payoff is higher on TikTok because of some of the things Amanda mentioned earlier about feeling connected to community, about feeling validated, feeling, especially again, at the time we were talking about all of this, like it's very isolating for everyone. So to have an online space where you could feel less alone about issues that really mattered, I guess to me that outweighed the potential data risk or concern. I was like, let us have TikTok, just let us have this.
yeah. Yeah. I could be more helpful there, but.
And I see one last question just about, will it be okay to post using your personal account? And that might be, I'll just chime in with my 2 cents, and that might be a really great segue into into Jake's topic. But I think it depends on what you're trying to do, right? And who you're trying to reach. The benefit of ads is that you can put a little money behind it, and then it can reach brand new people who don't follow you, who have never heard of you. If you're trying to reach people that currently follow you, like your friends, or if you I don't know, if you have the platform like Jake has with like a paper or a media source and you want to reach your current audience, then yeah, go for it. You don't necessarily even need ads. If you just want to change the mind of like your closest friends, use your personal account. But for us, we just wanted to try it on a bit of a bigger scale.
Yeah, love it. And perfect. So let's segue into Jake. Gavin, if we could have him pinned here. And then before I ask Jake questions, Gavin, can you also play the 5/1 TikTok of Jake's, just so we can kind of show some folks a little of what he's got going on here? I was scrolling through your TikTok earlier.
I am a building.
All right, I guess we got to do this. Let's talk about 5/1s.
These are popping up all over Long Beach, probably your city too. And I know y'all are just dying to call these gentrification buildings, but I'm gonna show you that's not always true. First up, we have Beacon Point Apartments here in Long Beach. These are 120 subsidized units offering low-income senior housing, and it replaced low-rise retail like that. Here's another one, also on the blue line. This one is mixed use with ground floor retail. It's also mixed income, meaning some of the units are market rate and some of them are subsidized. And it literally replaced an empty lot you can still see on Apple Maps. Here's one more, 1795 Long Beach Boulevard. It's mixed income, meaning some are market rate, some are subsidized. And this one also replaced low-rise retail and a parking lot. Here's another one that's mixed income. Some units are subsidized, some are market rate. And look, they even have brick facades. Out here just calling every new building gentrification. A, it's lazy, and B, it's not always true. Even public or social housing is going to look like this because it's just the cheapest way to build right now. And this has been true throughout history. The reason there are so many brick buildings in the Northeast is because brick was cheap and abundant and fire codes hadn't been updated yet. But a bunch of giant city fires changed that, and we stopped building with brick. You know, the Soviets were notorious for building massive blocks of apartments that all looked the same. And people complained about the aesthetics of those too. But guess what? They did it because their goal was housing everybody, not making sure their buildings look pretty. If we want to take a page out of their playbook and paint them all different colors, that's fine by me. But housing for all is much more important than aesthetic housing. And these 501s are going to be the way we achieve housing for all. So get used to it.
I am the building.
All right, I guess.
Thanks, Gavin.
So, thank you for sharing that. And I want to mention, I figured out the microphone issue, so I'm not just yelling at the camera all the time anymore. I did handle that situation, but that was, I'm glad you guys shared that, because that was probably the most viewed video about like a very niche topic, right? So people were probably looking at that and they saw, okay, that has 48,000 likes. Like that's a lot of people who saw this video and like were still somehow interested in watching it through and listening to me talk about all, you know, these different building types and what they're providing and what they replace and all that nuance. And the point is, I never could have gotten to that if I didn't have a very large chunk of followers from before there that already knew, you know, a lot of the stuff that I was talking about. And so I'll take it back to the beginning in a second here, but the point was, it did take me a while to sort of build to that point where I could talk about that issue. And so I had to go from talking about the very bare bones of things to talking about, you know, the next step up and then the next step up. And all of that was somewhat dependent on, you know, people having some sort of base of knowledge. But if you want, I can share my screen here. And I wanted to show some of my earlier videos.
Yes, please.
Let's see if this works.
And I'm glad you fixed your mic issue.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things that I had to figure out. I'm not sure how to. There it is. One sec, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Gavin, behind the scenes, making sure all of our tech needs are met.
Yes, thank you very much. Not sure if it's gonna, oh yeah, there it is. So. Is that working? You can see my screen, okay. There we go. So let's start, I wanna start with this one, just because this is the first one that I did on housing issues. If it'll work here. There we go.
Do you ever wonder why things are so expensive in California?
I don't know what just happened, sorry. There it is.
Do you ever wonder why things are so expensive in California? Turns out the answer's all around you. According to the LA Times, nearly 2/3 of the residences in California are single-family homes. That means a single detached building with a front and backyard and a carport or garage. Even more important than that, in a neighborhood like this, each lot has to be a certain size. So it would be against the law to build 2 houses on one of these plots of land. Here's the kicker though, more than half of all residential land in California is zoned for single family housing only. In LA, it's more like 75% of the entire city. That means in most of the places where it's even legal to build a house, you can only build single family houses, which is why they're all you can see for miles and miles around. Obviously, this is a hard limit on the number of houses you can build, which is why California is 49th in per capita housing, which is why it's so damn expensive. Do you ever wonder why things are so expensive in California?
That is obviously a very basic introduction to, one of the largest issues with housing. We have a lot of single family homes. We don't have any other type of housing. And that's basically because there's a lot of rules to prevent that. And so I started with just saying that without getting into any of the details about all the different rules and all of that, because that was, the thing that I knew was the introduction to this entire issue. Here's another one that's a pretty similar intro type of video.
Okay, it's windy as fuck. That's why I'm yelling. So I want to show you something. These buildings over there, those are stores. Those are restaurants and shops. And then over there is all the housing. You know why they're not just, instead of putting, the houses on top of all of those, they have to be in two separate spots because it's illegal to put the houses on top of the restaurants.
So again, very basic introductory stuff, but it got a very large response because people are just sitting here, like you're saying, not knowing anything about housing policy, not knowing anything about the entire background of this issue, but just knowing that housing is too gosh darn expensive. And by showing some of these like very simple visual examples of what the problem is, that's how you build towards, okay, how do you solve that problem, right? And so that's essentially what I tried to do with my TikTok in the first place, was just to start talking about these issues in the most basic introductory way. And so I talked about freeways, I talked about Barrio Logan, Coronado, and then I was like, I got to go to LA and talk about LA stuff because it's so much bigger, so much more representative of these issues, and also probably going to get a better response from more people because it's just a bigger market. And this one is the one that has the most views of a video I've ever done. So I want to show that as well.
I'm going to show you modern day segregation. Come on. This is a nice little neighborhood here in Inglewood, California, but it's also right next to a freeway. Now, all I did was go to the other side of the freeway, and the neighborhood is, pretty much the same. Doesn't look that much different, but guess what? For some reason, houses on this side of the freeway cost twice as much as they do over in Inglewood. I'm sure the racial divide on either side of that freeway is just a coincidence, huh? And I'm sure the fact that Inglewood was redlined back in the 30s as hazardous has nothing to do with that either. And the extensive single-family only zoning on the west side compared to multifamily zoning on the east side also has nothing to do with it. See, first they redlined the whole city so that certain people could only live in certain neighborhoods. Then they changed the zoning laws to limit the number of houses that were allowed in a nice area. And then they built all these freeways to wall off the bad neighborhoods from the good ones and destroyed a bunch of homes of people who fell in the process. LA doesn't just stay this segregated by accident. Damn freeways keep it that way. Show you modern day segregation.
And so at this point, we dove into the racial societal issues that go hand in hand with housing and some of the history behind those issues. And as I said, this video is the most viewed video I've ever made, probably because it does the best job encapsulating a combination of all of those issues. Okay, we have housing laws that are preventing certain types of construction. We have freeways that were built between communities, literally intentionally to divide them. And then we have the racial demographics of our modern day that are directly tied to racial decisions that we made 100 years ago, and then how we've perpetuated all of those. Point of all this to be, I had to build on one thing after another, because this wasn't meant to be just, I'm going to explain everything all at once. Obviously, it's a TikTok account. There's only a minute. But that approach, that opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to talk about these issues, but break each one down into an individual segment and break it all down to talk about specific examples of where this is causing problems and then try and show those examples, that became sort of the formula for how to share this sort of information without overwhelming people and without you know, expecting them to know too much before they got into it. And just scrolling up, I mean, you can look at all this obviously yourself. There's a lot of other content in here that talks about those different intersections of housing, policy, history, etc. And then I got into some of the advocacy work talking about the state bills that could affect those issues. And then talking about transportation and all that. So the whole point here, and I don't need to share anymore, I don't think. The whole point here essentially is that there was not really a systemic approach from the beginning, the way y'all had with your, you know, ad campaign, because it was a campaign that was essentially meant to target a specific type of people. Whereas I was saying, okay, I want to reach as many different people as possible and get as many people as I can to have an introduction to this issue. Because I wasn't doing it for, you know, any advocacy group specifically. I wasn't doing it with any organization. And so I didn't have sort of the constraints around what I could do that some of you have. But because of that, I also didn't have one specific mission or goal in mind. And so while I was more free to talk about whatever I want, I didn't have one coordinated, you know, plan of attack or anything like that. But that actually opened things up to, I think, a lot more communication and interaction and whatnot between the audience, because as you were saying, those comments are where I get a lot of the, you know, how this video is being received. I get responses from people who are just honestly interested because they watched the video and took the time to write a comment. So I, you know, take them at their, I give them the benefit of the doubt there. But then, like you said, a lot of it's very negative. A lot of it's very just sort of doomerist, where it's like, no matter what happens, nothing's going to change and we're just stuck with unaffordable housing. And I had to figure out, as you were saying, a way to try to address those sort of comments and issues, but I didn't want to just go back and directly talk to the commenter and whatnot. And so that led me to, you know, creative ways to respond to these comments and respond to what people are saying and actually address the issues that they're talking about without sort of creating this dynamic where people are just sending me stuff and expecting me to respond to it, because I didn't want that. But anyway, it did give me a lot of opportunities to sort of farm content and figure out what I was doing. And at some point, I realized I was sort of running in a loop where I would talk about an issue, get comments, talk about their response. And then when I talked about the response, I would get comments from people who hadn't seen the first video. And like, there's only so much I can do to say, oh, go back to that one and see that. And so I realized I should just talk about what I want to talk about, share what I need to share, and then let the chips fall where they may. And I am extraordinarily happy with the response. I never imagined I would have 90,000 or whatever it is followers who are interested in urbanism and whatnot, but I'm amazed that I do. And that told me that, okay, there's clearly an audience for this kind of stuff. There's clearly people out there who want housing to be more affordable, obviously, but then they want to know why it's not. They want to know what they could do to fix that. And so that's sort of where it led me down that path. Once I tried to explain all of these issues, once I tried to talk about some of the things that could happen, I also directed people to different advocacy groups, told them to, you know, call your senator and support the California state bills that were coming out. Talk to your community leaders and get them to figure out how they can support different projects in your neighborhood, all that kind of stuff. Because it's such a broad issue and it's an issue that touches so many different aspects of life that I think we said this at the beginning, there's nothing that isn't related to housing. Every issue at the end of the day comes back to that housing problem. And so I eventually got to the point where I was just taking issues kind of off the shelf and saying, okay, how is this related to housing? How is this related to housing? Why is this the way it is? Oh, wow, it's because we don't have enough houses. And once you start looking at the world through that sort of lens, which is all I wanted to do with my account, you start seeing things everywhere where you're just like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Why did we make that choice? Why are we continuing to make that choice as a society when everybody knows it's not good for people right now and there's an easy way to change it? We just build more apartments. But essentially that's where I'm at. I didn't have as much of a presentation as me. Oh, sorry. I want to talk about the transition to working for the Post. that was my last thing, of course. So from there, that sort of platform that I had established, the publisher of the Post, David Sommers at the time, reached out to me and essentially said, hey, you've been talking about these issues. Do you want to do that for the Post with more of a Long Beach centric focus, basically? So instead of only talking about housing and talking about it sort of wherever, mainly in California, I'm talking about whatever, but only in Long Beach. And so the approach to that sort of content is very different. Obviously, I am not just talking about whatever I want or whenever I want, and I'm talking about a lot of timely issues as they come up as well. But it's a different audience also, and it's a different way of reaching people. So instead of just sending out a video and hoping that a lot of people, you know, will be interested in this thing, I have content from our journalists and, you know, from the organization that I know is going to be interesting to people, or I know it's already interesting to people. I know it's already something that the community is very concerned about. And then that guides how I talk about it. Because again, I can't just purely give my opinion and just say this is the way things should be. It's not exactly that position anymore. But I can give perspective on these things in a way that a lot of people can't. And so that's sort of the other way that you can talk about these issues is there's all these things going on in Long Beach, and there's all these things that are happening in, you know, the larger Southern California communities that are absolutely tied to housing, and people don't see it that way. But having that sort of contextual understanding about these issues and the way they affect the larger systems overall, it lets me take, you know, a story about homelessness or a story about Airbnbs even, and, you know, like this one small portion of hotel-ish type housing policy that becomes so polarized and so intensely like debated, even though it's just about, you know, a couple hundred rental homes here in Long Beach. But because housing is so incredibly expensive and so much of an issue, even that becomes a polarizing issue with the community, because there are people out there who say, well, no, we don't want more Airbnbs renting out luxury rentals. We need that for housing. And then you have to take, I mean, again, this is my opinion, but the opinion I have is that, well, if we had enough housing in the first place, it wouldn't matter if anybody who wanted to rented out their house as an Airbnb. But of course, that's not the reality right now. And so we got to talk about how to navigate having non-hotel amenities and whatnot, and also having housing and all that. And so that's not a conversation that I wanted to have. I didn't want to have to sit here and talk about Airbnbs on, you know, TikTok. But because of how incredibly messed up our housing market is, things like that get sucked in. And that's sort of the way that I've been able to approach talking about localized and timely issues. And I, you know, without pushing an agenda, but just with providing this sort of important context that, okay, you know, this issue, that issue, that issue, if we really get down to it, we could solve a lot of those problems by building 5,000 apartments here in the city. And I'm gonna keep hammering away at that until it happens. And then we're probably gonna need 5,000 more, and I'm gonna have to keep hammering away at it again. But the point is, if there's no one saying that about these issues, if there's no one saying, okay, well, here's how this is a housing issue, here's how this is related to all these other systems, then it just never gets solved. And people keep looking at these things as unsolvable problems. And I just think that they're not, and we know they're not, and we got to get other people to at least understand there's a way to fix this. And all it takes is a lot more participation from people like us, honestly.
Gosh, thank you so much, Jake. That was amazing. And here I thought we wouldn't be able to fill the time. Look at us. That's a TikTok reference. Look at us. But Jake, I think you touched on a lot of really great things, but the thing that I wanted to circle back to was how you also found the comments inspiring in a way to create your content, right? I think sometimes we think that we need to come up with this new great big thing, and we don't. The content is already there, just based off of NIMBY, you know, conversations and NIMBYism, right? We can build off of the talking points that they create for us, and being like, okay, that's not right, and here's why.
Right.
And one of the things I love most about your content, Jake, is it's so real and honest. And it's not, you're not sugarcoating anything, which I think some of the other content creators who do focus on housing and kind of, transit or urban planning can, they toe a line, they're trying to, I think, be respectful, which great, but it's 2022 and I'm done being respectful, and there's, like no more. And it's refreshing to see, and I love that your content covers, most of California. And I assume you probably just drove down to San Diego to, get some of your stuff, or drove up to LA. And, and I know that more that I learn, like, especially from some of your videos, like the segregation one, I remember thinking that and being like, well, yeah, I knew that freeways had ruined communities, but I guess you just kind of stop thinking at that. Like, you stop here. And then I saw that again and I was like, oh, that's right. These communities over here near the freeways are not experiencing the same things over here. And we think that they've been redone or rebuilt, or that doesn't exist anymore. But pollution impacts health, which is a housing issue. And here in San Diego, people who live near Barrio Logan have worse health and, asthma compared to those in La Jolla. And I live on a really busy corner with a bus stop every 15 minutes. And I think about, how much air pollution is seeping through my windows when I'm in a walkable neighborhood, right? And so anyway, I'm going on a tangent here, but
No, but you're right. And especially just because I've been thinking about this so much, the sort of housing near freeways and just arterial roads, especially, that is one of the biggest problems with sort of citywide and county approaches to addressing affordable housing these days, is that every time they say, okay, we're going to let you build apartments, it's only along these corridors that are 6-lane roads or near freeways. It's only in the parts of the city that are already, for lack of a better word, shitty.
yeah.
And they only let us build apartments in those areas. And then so those people who live in those apartments are inundated with pollution and car noise and all the other problems that go along with living next to a road.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the other people who are still living in their single family home neighborhoods a few blocks away are completely isolated from all of that.
Yeah.
And then so guess what happens? Then everyone has this connotation in their mind with apartments being in the shitty parts of the city next to freeways and roads, and with single family housing and all that being in the nice part of the city. And that just gets perpetuated every time we build another apartment complex on a main arterial road. And so it's like, I want the city to build more apartments. That's better than not building more apartments, but only doing it in certain locations is another huge inequitable way of approaching this problem. And we can talk about this all day, but the point is that's one of those little things that really comes up every time we talk about housing that makes such a big influence.
Right. And here in San Diego, we call them transit priority areas. And if they're going to be built within, a half a mile, it's a transit priority area, which great. I love the bus. I take the bus. I don't have a car, so I'm all about transit. But also I want to breathe. And and until it's like, yes, let's build housing, but are we also going to address these gas hog buses? I mean, I remember when I was in Paris and the cute little, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the little electric buses that are in Paris. They're adorable. They're like mini. And I'm like, bring that here, because, I have to wait for the bus I don't want to cross behind a bus because it's just spewing so much grossness. Anyway, in the interest of time, so we have about 15 minutes left. I did see one question in the chat, but I wonder if Mia, yes, please go ahead. But
well, I actually, go ahead, Amanda. Yes, I want to make sure we leave time for that. But Jake, I just particularly loved what you said about everything as a housing issue. And I just thought that was so brilliant. And there's some questions in the chat about our approach, right? Using ads on behalf of an organization and getting approved. and dealing with all of that versus the approach that you took, which you didn't intend to have the growth that you did, but just being like super real, super direct, and just telling it how it is, right? In a much longer form. Our advertising watch views were like 4 seconds, right? There's only so much you could do in 4 seconds. You do a lot more in 30 seconds, which I think you did. And so I just want to uplift like these different approaches on the same platform. And there are so many more also that people can, that you all can use. And it kind of maybe is a good segue into one of the questions, which was, have you had any luck driving people to calls to action? It seems like influencers with an organic following may be in a better position to drive actions.
So I have done some advocacy work in that field. The biggest thing I did was just do an explainer of the big housing bills that came out last year, SB 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, I think. Only 9 and 10 passed, so that's better than none. That's great. But the issue with sort of these things that I'm talking about, outside of a few instances, most of what I was telling people to do was like contact your individual senator, right? Or go to your city council meeting and this stuff like that. Tell your leader that you want this. And so I'm pretty sure that I got some people to do that kind of thing. I don't have any sort of data on if I did or not. I have a link tree in my bio that I should check for like link click-throughs and stuff. But essentially I wasn't getting super good push through to other, links or anything like that. One of the issues I think that's the biggest problem there is that in the actual TikTok video itself, there's no way to link to anything else. So like if you're on Twitter and you post something, you can have a link in the tweet, obviously. If you're on Instagram even, I don't know if Instagram works as well either, but those videos that go up on TikTok, there's no link directly to anything from the video. And so if I have a call to action, it's go to my bio, click this link, click another link in that link, and then that'll take you to the link that you need to go to. And so like, these are kids and that's a lot of clicks. Like I don't expect too much of that, but I really hope that it did get some direct action like that. And above all of that, particularly with what I was doing, I wasn't really trying to direct people towards one specific thing. Like there was no advocacy group that I was saying every time, hey, go check out their work and, sign up for this or that, because I didn't have any group like that. But I am fairly certain that not just myself, also Tosh and other people who have been doing this sort of content on TikTok have driven the conversation in a very positive direction over the past essentially year or so, just because of the sort of response that we've been getting over that time, in terms of how engaged people are with this sort of content, and then what sort of responses and questions and stuff like that they have. If they have questions that are, good questions about what individual actions they can take, that means I know I'm activating people. Whereas when I started doing all of this, the only questions I would ever get are like, oh, can you explain this or that? Or can you talk about this thing? And so just feeling the conversation shift from a year ago to now, with a whole bunch of people at least engaging in this type of stuff and at least having an open mind about, housing as an issue that can be solved, it at least made me pretty sure that the stuff that we're doing is working and the stuff that we're doing is reaching the right audience. Because again, it's really about creating this conversation with people who never would have had this conversation in the first place. And so even if they don't end up going to, a specific action link, I know that it's getting this sort of conversation out there, and then that leads to other things. That leads people down that road and leads them to other places to start being more informed about this issue. And then that's when they get to the sort of action thing. And so I see myself in this role as sort of the icebreaker, or like, I guess the gateway drug, where I'm getting people sort of hooked on this kind of stuff. And then I'll tell them, if you want to learn more, there's all these other groups out there that are doing individual work. If you want to get involved, you have to go find groups and people and talk to your city council member, talk to your legislative leaders, actually take the time to sit down and write an email, and it makes such a big difference. And so as long as I can keep doing that, I'm pretty happy with the response.
Yeah, I mean, TikTok is a little different in the sense that you can't link links, and so you create all these other clicks. And as a marketer, I always tell people you don't want people clicking more than twice. And if you have to click to go to Jake's bio and then click to go somewhere else, the conversion rate is just going to be very just low. But I think that also touches on, it's hard to measure advocacy. And someone might look at Jake's video, learn what a 5/1 is, see it being talked about on Nextdoor, and then support it. And that's not measurable. And the person who asked the question was with California YIMBYs, and I would recommend for something like a California YIMBY where you could partner with like a Jake or a Tosh on a specific campaign, like SB9 already passed, but as an example, where it's a very specific thing that you guys work together. And to the Housing Federation, when our ask was just to follow, maybe it's something like a follow or tag an elected official in the comments. They might not all have TikToks, some of them are, which is also really great to see. But I think some of the conversion is going to be stuff that we don't see, and it might be what we see in our neighborhoods, and that's more 5/1s, more mixed use housing, more affordable housing. So there's ways to do it, but that's like, I think the one thing with TikTok is, and I see it with a lot of other advocacy TikTok folks, when we think about Indigenous women and the missing and murdered, and when we talk about what's happening with the residential schools and all the bodies that are still being digged up. I think last I checked, it was over 10,000, just a fact to show. But like, that's kind of hard things to follow. We just have a few more minutes left, so I'm just going to kind of buzz through these questions. There's a question about who else to follow. I put Tosh in the chat. So she's a good follow. She's based in NorCal, so she was going to kind of be our NorCal voice. She has some really great videos on like Berkeley and what's been happening there, and just lots of slow streets and same kind of content is Jake. There's a question here about the ideas for future of housing talk, like what's the potential? Jake, I don't know if you want to maybe take a stab at that.
I know that I'm gonna keep up with a lot of the stuff that's happening. Something I like to say is that state bills are the only way forward in a lot of cases. And so every time there's a new session, there's going to be new bills that come out, and there's going to be new things to talk about. One of the biggest issues that I haven't really approached too much is parking, and the fact that, especially with my experience here in Long Beach, but all over California, you get to these very densely populated areas that aren't densely housed enough. There's a lot of crowding. There's a lot of multi-generational families living in the same home, a lot of big families living in smaller homes, essentially. And there's no parking in those neighborhoods for their cars that they need to get to work and whatnot. But the other side of that is, like, obviously that's a reflection of our car dependence. Obviously that's a reflection of, we didn't build dense transit-oriented communities. And point being, there's a bunch of bills coming up that are going to attack sort of the two sides of that issue, which is we have to build transit so people don't have to drive, and then build housing near the transit so that people can live there. Point is, there's a lot of stuff left to talk about for sure. And this is always a growing and evolving issue that is going to have new, flashpoints. And every time one of those comes up, don't worry, I'm going to be there on TikTok.
Absolutely. And I want to piggyback on that. Now that I'm with San Diego Pride and I'm able to fully step into my Black bisexual advocate self in a way that is not necessarily always appreciated in some other organizations. But I think there's a renaissance that's happening because of the pandemic. We see this with workers. We see this with, with the great resignation. We see this with what's happening with bike lanes and people wanting to rethink how they get around, with people rethinking how we get our groceries. We no longer need to go and do these big, gigantic buys of, 2 or 3 weeks worth of food. We can now get stuff delivered for just the week, or we can walk to the store. And I think that's going to be some potential. And I think really sitting in this intersectionality, right? Like when now I'm going into meetings and thinking about things from a LGBTQ perspective. And, I've been saying lots of, we're here and we're queer. And, it's everywhere. When we look at the statistics of who's homeless, it's a lot of, in San Diego, it's disproportionately Black, and nationwide, it's disproportionately LGBTQ. And those are, I think, some of the key things that, like a California YIMBY, can lean into. If you're going to be doing some of these YIMBY influencer things, think about it not just from like a Jake and Mia perspective, but also from your BIPOC and your LGBTQ and all those kinds of acronyms, but really this intersectional approach, because housing is so intersectional. It's healthcare, it's climate change, it's all the stuff that you guys have been learning about this week. And it's all the stuff that we know. And I hope that this panel and this conversation today helps you think about new ways that you can tell these different stories around housing, whether that's on TikTok, whether that's with your friends over pizza. I hope that you will follow Jake. Please reach out to Mia if you're looking for some high-level marketing support. Reach out to Jake if you're looking for some influencers. He probably knows some people. And please come out to San Diego Pride. But if there's not any other questions, I want to give you guys, about a minute back of your day. I'm sure this was a long day in person. I don't even know how this is working in person. I assume we're like being broadcasted on a screen or something, but hi. But Mia, Jake, thank you so much for spending some time with me talking about my favorite platform, my favorite thing. Any other closing thoughts from either of you?
Well, I'm just super inspired by the both of you. So it's really just a treat for me to be here and talk to all of you. And hopefully this sparks more ideas and a lot more in the future. So I'm excited about all the potential.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I appreciate you inviting me, and it was a great conversation. If I could say one more thing, everyone try an e-bike. If you haven't, everyone go ride an electric bike. And then tell me that you don't want to ride one ever again, because if you ride one, you'll be hooked immediately. And then you'll figure out, oh, now I don't have to drive. I'm saving money on gas. It's fun. I'm outside, all that. Just go ride one and try it, because I did, and it literally changed so much of my life. I'm telling you.
They are the best.
There's one.
They
thing-
are the
yeah.
best. My boyfriend and I, we rode a tandem e-bike for the opening of the 30th
wow.
Street bike lanes here in
Nice.
San Diego. Yeah, someone had, it was a tandem bike that they had like attached a battery to. There were saddlebags of all the stuff.
Mhm.
We loved it. And my boyfriend is a huge car guy who's like cars all the way. And now he's like, we should get e-bikes.
Yeah.
And this is now becoming an e-bike panel. So
Yeah,
stick around if you want to talk about e-bikes.
It's all connected. If people can ride e-bikes everywhere,
Yeah.
they don't have to drive so much. They don't need parking. We get more housing, and everybody wins.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm
I
gonna
love
have to do a whole routine where someone throws out a problem and I relate it to housing and tell them why.
Yes, can you start with e-bikes? That's your next video, Jake.
I love it. Well, thank you all, and thank you attendees for being here. Have a great rest of your evening.
Yeah.
Please come over.
Cool.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.